Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to our innovation conference featuring executives from top tech companies across AI, analytics, cyber, fintech, quantum computing, CRM, and whatnot. My name is Yossi Garmazi, second year MBA student here at Cornell. I'm joined also by a classmate and a good friend of mine, Alvaro Jimenez. Alvaro?
Happy to be here, Yossi.
Yeah, so today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Mark Tluszcz, CEO and managing partner of Mangrove Capital. Mark is one of the most successful investors out there. His investments include Skype, Wix, and WalkMe, just to name a few. And currently, besides leading Mangrove Capital, is also the chairman of Wix and Care. So, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yossi, good to see you, and thank you for having me. Alvaro, also thank you for having me. I'm excited to hear the questions and have a great conversation today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are super fortunate to have you joining us today. So I thought actually to start before going on to your investments and your amazing insights, to ask you what led you to the tech world and specifically to the VC world in the first place.
Yeah, well, I kind of stumbled into it. I started off really in a traditional profession, which was the consulting profession in technology. And I quickly realized that this kind of coincided with the internet boom in the early 2000s. And I kind of thought to myself, it's fine to be in tech, but really the exciting place is, where you take a crystal ball out and really try and predict the future. And that's kind of what excites me still today, is to figure out what is cool and what's going to work in the future. And so, serendipitously, I met some people, we did this, and ultimately I ended up starting my own firm just because I felt that was the best thing for me to do. But the environment mattered more than anything. It was like, I want to be in this environment of innovation, of cool people, of cool ideas. By the way, it's also a rough environment. There's a lot of failure in this business, right? So many of our companies fail, and so you have to have thick skin to deal with this. But boy, man, when they're successful, and that really is just the adrenaline rush of the business.
I read that you looked at around 2,000 company a year, but invest in only around 6 of them. So I was just wondering, what is your first question that you ask an entrepreneur when he meets you?
Yeah, I mean, so those numbers are right. And I think that's probably largely what most early stage investors, you need to look at a lot of volume to get to a few deals. And despite that, we still fail more times than we succeed, right? So you have this massive funnel and you get successful very few times. What I really care in my first question with entrepreneurs when I talk about is, how big is your ambition? Walk me through your ambition for whatever you're doing. You could be shining shoes or you could be writing software. It doesn't really matter. What is your ambition? Because at the end of the day, startups are built on the back of people and people's ambition. Not, by the way, and the saying in our industry is, the graveyard is full of great ideas. And so the question of ambition and the ability to execute against that ambition is really criterion number one for us.
It's a people business at the end of the day to build a successful startup. And one of the first questions that entrepreneurs face is the equity sharing, because at the end you want to have as much as you can from the company in terms of stake, but you also want other people to have stake in the game in order to do the extra yard for you. What is your position on this specific topic?
Well, I think the answer would be different if you were venture backed or not, right? So if you're not venture backed and you kind of build the business over time, then you really want as an owner to have a biggest stake as possible, all the while sharing some of that. If you happen to be a venture backed company, the thing that forces upon you is the idea of having to grow fast and grow big and all of that. And founders can't do that on their own. They need to share that. And so we are massive proponents when we invest. In fact, it's one of the criterions once we've decided to invest is, we need to make sure that a significant piece of the capital of the company is reserved for current and future employees. The dream always is that if you take companies public or if you sell them, that you would have hundreds of employees who would be millionaires, right? That's the goal every single time we fund something.
I think it was also the case with Facebook as well. And last question before moving on to Wix is, do you have any red flags a no-no when you meet entrepreneur and you say, that's not for me? That's kind of
Yeah,
like maybe
we have
risky?
we have a long list of no-nos, but I would say no-no number one is we will never invest in a husband and wife team, ever. And you know, some people say to me, well, that's a bit silly, and you know, it doesn't really matter. Everybody has their red flags. This one is an important one for me because I feel like when you invest in founders or in teams, you know, as an investor, you need to be able to develop relationships with the entire team. Over time, we've learned that teams change and they morph. But if you're investing into a couple, you know, you're doubly in trouble because on the one hand, you can't get in between them, right? And secondly, if something happens in their couple, it just creates all sorts of havoc for the business. So that would be my number one flag. And I've looked at businesses in the past where I really liked the company, you know, and I really liked what they were doing. But then I discovered kind of in the process of due diligence that they were either, you know, living together or married, and that's fine. But for me, that's just something I will never do.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the only names that come to mind when you talk about like husband and wife that are actually successful is the Anthropic case. And yeah, besides that, also my father also told me never bring family to the business because it's getting a little bit feisty there.
Yeah, same theory, right? Same theory. It's like you need to have enough distance from that. And so that's just one of our kind of red flags, but it's an easy one, right? Husband and wife, you guys aren't together, fine. Okay, then we're all right, you know. But I think it creates too much stress.
Yeah, definitely. And now moving on to Wix and specifically your expansion to the Israeli market, Mangrove Capital started as a more European-based VC. I mean, at the end of the day, you invested in Skype.
Yeah.
But what led you to expanding specifically to Israel?
For the first 5 years of my firm, we were exclusively a European kind of funder of entrepreneurs. And yes, we were fortunate in that respect to fund Skype and a number of other really good companies. But in 2006, I funded a Parisian company, which ultimately didn't do very well, and it failed. But the founder did his aliyah to Israel, and he called me up in I think 2007 or something like that, and said, "Hey, you know, Mark, I want to say how sorry I am that I lost your money, and I really want to show you and I want to introduce you to the Israeli tech ecosystem." Of course, everybody had heard about it. We knew it was important, but you know, we had never really been there and everything. So I went to Israel in that context for the first time in 2007, and serendipity would have it, on that trip, I met the Wix founders. Right. And so through this guy, serendipitously, I met the Wix founders. And from 2007 on, as we began understanding the market a bit better, you know, we decided to make the firm a firm that would invest 50% of its capital in Europe and 50% in Israel. And it's just, I think outside of Silicon Valley, Israel as a market is probably the most dynamic market in the world after Silicon Valley, bar none, right? In terms of density of deals, quality of entrepreneurs. And so, of course, for us being very lucky in our first big Israeli investment in Wix, it made it very easy for us then to continue and set up an office there and do things like that. So serendipity brought me to Israel.
Nice. And specifically talking about Wix, so I mean, Wix, as many other tech company, benefited from the transition to be more online based, specifically in COVID.
Yeah.
But while many companies actually kind of like stumble a little bit post COVID, Wix is actually rebounded pretty well if you look at the stock price and also financial results. What do you think led to this success?
Well, of course, I know exactly what led to it. But look, yes, we all got a little fat during COVID. And we all got a little fat in COVID, I would say, and you know, came out of COVID and came out of 2021 going, all is great. You know, we all thought the world online would be our world. We weren't going to concerts physically for a couple of years. We said we're going to do all of that online. And it's funny because we're just celebrating the 5 years of COVID, right? Kind of right now. And you realize how silly some of those assumptions were. Well, the same thing was true for many, many tech companies. So we woke up in the first quarter of 2022 realizing, oh shit, you know, people have moved back into the real world. Their online presence is a lot less. We saw the numbers kind of coming down, and we decided that we at Wix had to really think about this. And so the Wix management team, over the period of 6 to 9 months, sat down and said, okay, we need to manage our costs better. We need to make sure our product development is doing this. And I think it took us a year to kind of restructure post-COVID. And that was extremely beneficial for the company and for the environment, is to realize that the true value of the world is your life is going to be a bit of both now, right? It's a lot online, but there's also a lot offline, and you have to manage your business that way. So it was just rigorous cost cutting, rigorous thinking about being careful about how we invested money, and just recognizing that there's this balance in the real life of online and offline worlds. And many companies were successful in doing that. Wix wasn't the only one, but there were many who just waited and waited and waited, and particularly if they were public companies, that their stock price struggled a lot. Yeah, we've gone, Wix right now is about a $500 million free cash flow business. So, in the first quarter of 2022, coming out of COVID, our cash flow generation was very tiny. We were very focused on just growing top line. Today, we've become really a terrific business, right? Good top line growth, significant profitability, great cash flow. Just, by the way, the company is almost 17 years old, so you'd expect that of a company of our age, right?
Yeah, definitely, and super insightful indeed. And maybe a follow-up about the differentiation is that we saw that in the recent year there has been a rise in specifically in the web building vertical.
Yeah.
Company like GoDaddy and Squarespace. But still, I mean, I can tell you that me and Avo, when we built the website for our business life, we chose Wix. So what do you think led to Wix differentiate itself from the competition and be, at the end of the day, the big winner?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end, Wix is all about the greatness of its product, right? So we care more about product than we care about anything else. And I think that's a formula that works extremely well in tech. It's really understanding what your users and how they're going to use the product. And so we have a great product team. We have huge volumes of developers and designers, but it's that commitment from the top of the company to say, we think first and foremost about product. Everything else is a result of great product. And I wouldn't say that all our competitors think of it that way. And so for us, it really is about product innovation. You've seen, we've made a number of announcements over the last 6 to 9 months. We continue to make announcements of new products. And I think as a company, if you're 17 years old like Wix, you need to demonstrate to yourself, to your employees, but also to financial investors that you know how to reinvent yourself constantly. And so that is really at the ethos of Wix, is reinventing yourself every day, questioning why people are using or not your product, and then just building better stuff. So product, I think would be the simple answer.
Yeah, so you say it's all about innovation while scaling fast. So amazing to hear that. And specifically, I mean, one of your other successful investment is Skype. How do you maybe compare Wix success to Skype success? And what is your experience like at Wix, maybe different from Skype?
Well, Wix is a real business. Skype was never a real business. We were also shareholders of Skype only for 3 years. And that was just, we went from 0 to massive in a very short period of time. Wix did that as well, but they also became a real business with real cash flow, with real ongoing customers. Also a very different time, right? Microsoft just announced that they're sunsetting Skype, so that's the end of an era. And Wix, while born in 2007, continues to be on the forefront of this. And I think they've managed, if you will, Wix to reinvent themselves multiple times. Skype, while it was the great winner of the first 5 years of the 2000s, to some extent, they should have been the Zoom of today. And they kind of missed that turn under ownership of other people and things like that. But so, that's what happens in tech. Your shelf life is short. If you don't reinvent yourself, ultimately you become a little irrelevant. And Skype is, in that respect, a sad, good example of that.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear it. We also just interviewed Oded Gal, who was the chief product officer at Zoom 3 years before COVID and 3 years after COVID. So it was fascinating to hear their part of the story how they were able to reinvent themselves. And one last question about Wix is the decision to hold out. I mean, at the end of the day, Wix is very successful business right now, and I guess along the way there was like couple of acquisition offers, but still, you decided to say no. And specifically, I read on the internet that I think it was like in around like maybe 2010, Wix received the acquisition offer for more than 400 million. Yet you advised them to say no, and eventually they went public on 2013. What convinced you to hold out and keep the journey
You know,
going? As the
I was, as an insider of Wix at the time, I really saw two things. One, I saw the velocity at which the product was being adopted in the market. And then I also saw the velocity of their product development capabilities. And I looked at those two things and I said, yes, on one hand, we have a terrific offer. At the time, the offer was, I think, $400 million to sell the business. And that was a very good offer. Everybody would have been happy, founders, investors, and everything. But you don't every day get the opportunity to build a massive company. And so, we looked at that offer. I flew to Tel Aviv. When we got the offer, I sat down with the founders and I said, look, I have absolute belief in your ability to take this company to the next level. The only place you can do is go public. That, yes, is painful, but you're going to be able to build a multi-billion-dollar business if you have patience, because customer velocity and adoption is massive and your ability to develop products is massive. So when you look at those things, I think you have to then say no. Now, the founders said to me at the time, that's great, and we believe you and we will follow your advice because you did Skype before, right? You know how to build these big businesses. And we have faith in your ability to understand that. So a combination of things happened, and I think, of course, history tells us we made the right decision. Everybody is happy. Wix is a $10 billion business today. It's been a $15 billion business. But what it is for sure, I think, is it's a cornerstone of the Israeli tech scene. You may or may not have seen our new campus just north of Tel Aviv. It's an absolutely remarkable place. It's really the single campus style place that you have in Israel. We have almost 4,000 employees there. So, holding out was for sure the right decision financially, for the tech scene, for the founders, and really for the Wix family. It was absolutely the right decision. But it took courage from the founders to walk away from $400 million. And I think that's what you have.
Yeah, definitely not an easy decision. And I can tell you that my last work experience in Israel was in 888 Holdings in Herzliya. And all the time I went by the new Wix offices. So it was amazing to see from, from the outside. Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, if we look at most of your investment is tech focus, right? But it seems you also made another transition to be in healthcare, and one of your most famous investment where you are also the chairman in is K-Health. Yeah. Can you maybe share some of your experience? What led you to join K-Health board, and what led you to the healthcare world?
Yeah, in 2015, it became at least apparent to us as we took out our crystal ball and said, what's going to be hot in the next 10 years? It became apparent that healthcare was going to be a looming problem. The first input was populations are aging, healthcare costs are skyrocketing. And if you look at that, that is to some extent a formula for success, because you say, aha, only software can fundamentally change those economics, right? Only software and only innovation can do that. And so it became apparent that if we could figure out how to try and do something in healthcare. So we usually have that idea. We then do a lot of research. We publish some papers. There's a paper on healthcare on our website, and then we say to all of our partners, go find all these companies that are doing cool stuff in healthcare. The first thing you learn in healthcare is that the last thing you want to do is fund a company that's started by a doctor, okay? Because they simply can't think out of the box. This is not only true to doctors, it's true to all incumbents, right? But I'm giving it in the context of healthcare. And so if you look at most of the successful companies in healthcare today, most of them were not founded by actual medical practitioners. They have many medical people in their company, but the ability to break out of the box, to think very differently, comes from very creative people. And so, we've been fortunate to be invested in K Health, which is an Israeli-American company. We're also fortunate to be involved in a company called Flow, which is a female menstrual cycle company, the largest in the world. And I think it shows you, if you build great products, that satisfied a very big audience, that you're going to be able to build super companies. But, in 2015, everybody thought we were crazy. Healthcare, software, internet's not really going to work. I think today, nobody questions that anymore 9 or 10 years later. Never mind the next 10 years, which I think are going to be really massive in healthcare. Massive. So, yeah.
Yeah, super insightful. And maybe last question for myself before we moving on to Alvaro. I mean, everyone talks now about AI, right? How do you see specifically the intersection of healthcare and software and AI together in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Well, I think, if you look at most LLMs out there, they're still not 100% trustworthy, right? So they hallucinate is the word that we tend to use in AI. You simply can't have that in healthcare. If the machine hallucinates, people can die. And so the challenge with AI and healthcare and all of that is making sure that the product that you build kind of, I think, fits into the broader healthcare ecosystem. But at the same time, you have to build a machine that itself knows what it doesn't know and says, I'm not sure. And that's not the case when you use any of the typical LLMs out there, right? They try to guess because they're predictive models. Today, the truth of the matter is these LLMs, probably 20 to 25% of the time, they're hallucinating. They're getting better and better, but even if it's 1%, that's dangerous in healthcare. And so that's the one thing that AI has to be careful in healthcare, is being able to understand what you don't know, raise your hand and say, as a machine, I don't know this. We need to figure another way to find the true answer here. So that's the danger.
Yeah, and will be very interesting to see it in the next few years, how it's actually the intersection between the two. And yeah, Mark, thank you very much for answering all of my questions. I learned a lot. Super appreciate you. And yeah, Alvaro, without further ado, the floor is yours.
All right, man. Thanks. Hello.
Thank you, Yossi. So, Mark, we're beginning to talk about something that is very interesting, which is the future of healthcare. And now that AI is part of the conversation in pretty much any industry, we're talking about this bias. So, in your opinion, how can we ensure that AI-driven medical decisions are accurate and not skewed? How do we design those systems?
Well, certainly I can tell you the story of K, because we've designed a product that, in my opinion, is on a diagnostic basis is better than an actual human. And the way we did that is we started off by getting a very large data set of medical records. We then built a machine around those records. And then we added an LLM on top to facilitate the conversation, right, between users. And we made sure that all the safeguards, all the bias we put in there were biased towards knowing something. And so either the machine has 100% confidence in its ability to detect or to diagnose, and if it doesn't, then it raises a red flag. Every machine, of course, is always going to be biased by its creator. And you see that with all the LLMs, right? Whether they're ultimately Chinese LLMs or American LLMs, we've caught a lot of bias in all of those, right? And you will likely see national LLMs in the not too distant future, right? Where, Russia might have one, the Middle East might have one, some countries. And so they're all going to be biased around something. And that's what you cannot have in healthcare, right? And so in healthcare, I think the bar of the biasness is even higher. And the way you prove that is you conduct tons of studies, you put that machine in clinical settings. We at K Health, the product is running at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in California, Mayo Clinic, Hackensack in New Jersey. So it's been now operating for multiple years in real clinical settings. And there, you discover when it's working, when it's not working, when it's better than humans, when it's not, and things like that. And you continue to refine the product, because at the end, your only bias is you don't want to kill people. And that is fundamentally important in not making those type of mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And it looks like that at the end of the day, this is the biggest disruption in the past years. And I wanted to refer to a blog conversation that you had with Alan Block, where he pointed out that medical protocols haven't changed much since the 50s and the costs are untenable.
Yeah.
So how do you anticipate that K-Health is going to be able to help with this?
Well, I think first of all, Harvard came out with a study a couple of years ago that suggests that the half-life of doctors' knowledge when they leave university is about 5 years, right? So you graduate from any medical school anywhere in the world, your knowledge is as fresh as it can be. Then 5 years later, you're already kind of out. And the reality is, of course, with doctors, there's a bell curve. There's good ones, average ones, and bad ones. And most of them are not constantly learning, right? And so their knowledge is eroding over time. The benefit of the machine is has always the latest information, right? And so I think that's one way you just generally get better around that. And so this constant learning loop makes a lot of sense. These machines fundamentally, once you put them into the hospitals, they're also constantly learning, right? In terms of the things that they can do. So not sure if that answers the question, but that's how we're thinking about it as we're plugging this technology into these hospitals. If you were to dream a little bit, you would say over time, and probably let's say in the next decade, right? It would be reasonable to think that 50% of all doctors' visits are going to be automated by a machine. So let me throw just some numbers out, right? In the US, there's somewhere between 1.5 to 2 billion doctors' visits per year. You can imagine the pressure that's puts on the healthcare system. You can imagine the pressure it puts on hospitals and everything like that. If you could extract half of that and automate them, then you have a real winner in terms of productivity, for instance, right? That number in Europe is 3 to 4 billion visits, principally because in Europe it doesn't cost a lot of money, so people go much more to the doctor, right? But then if you move into Africa, if you move into South America and places like that, they just don't have access to great doctors. And so, the ability to automate this over time for most functions is well within our grasp, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to drive, I think, tremendous productivity enhancements. But more importantly than that, it's going to drive better medicine because human doctors are going to be able to spend more time with the patients that really need you. And that's our goal, right? Our goal is not to replace doctors. Our goal is to make the health system significantly more productive and better. Look, 18% of the US GDP goes to healthcare, 18. Average of the European Union is 12%. And we're getting older. So, this problem is not going away. Unless we solve it, unless we get to the scale of somewhere in the 50 range, we're not going to be able to have the massive impact that we think we're going to have going forward. And it's all going to happen now, I think, in a very, very quick fashion.
So it is a growing problem everywhere with the aging of the population, and you just mentioned it with these figures. But then innovation may be a way of resolving this. But you did mention before that you would not invest in a company led by a doctor, that they're not the innovators. So as these apps that are not found, that are not created by medical practitioners, how do you think that you can put together the technical side from the practitioner with the creative side from someone that thinks outside of the box?
Well, I'd say that if you look at, I think I looked last year at, the top 50 healthcare apps out there, and top being the most active ones, or most downloaded ones. I think maybe 1 or 2 were started by doctors. The lion's share were not. It doesn't mean, of course, that within those companies, they don't have tons of doctors, right? We at K have several hundred doctors working at K, because at the end, it is about medicine. It is about doctors and things like that. It's just that I think, generally speaking, incumbents, no matter what you are, incumbents struggle to think differently than what they've been brought up to think. And so you need that person to come in who doesn't accept the burden of the past and says, let's build this, let's try this. If not, you just go, no, I can't do that because, historically, that's how we've done. So you ultimately need a combination of the two, of course. In our case at K, we bought a very large medical database from Maccabi, which is an HMO in Israel. It was, millions of records over 20 years of doctors' handwritten notes, So our basic data set was extremely doctor rich. Yeah.
And if you had to pinpoint one factor that made K Health and Flow successful, what would you say it is?
Well, I think it's just I mean, flow by virtue of just an introduction very quickly. This is a women's female menstrual cycle tracker started by two brothers. So again, not the obvious founders, right? How the hell can two guys start something like this? Well, I think it's precisely for that same reason as I gave about doctors. In this case, it's two guys that are not women who didn't have this problem, but figured out, let me figure out a way to build something that works. So, the product focus, just like I said to Yossi before about Wix, I think these two companies, they really got the product experience very, very well. And they didn't accept any of the burdens of the incumbent system. I remember asking my wife, would you use an app like Flow? She goes, I've had two kids. Why would I need it? And I'm like, okay, but wasn't my question. For her, tracking her menstrual cycles was something she'd done her whole life. She didn't need an app. Whereas for these two brothers, it's like, well, let's focus on a younger generation of people who love apps. There's tons of those out there. And I think, again, just two good examples of thinking completely out of the box.
Okay, so that's actually very, very interesting what you mentioned about thinking outside of the box, being able to resolve problems that you may not be directly connected to. And now we're moving on to something that is different to healthcare. Is there any other vertical that you think is maybe now outdated and in need of innovation?
Well, obviously the whole legal side, the whole legal profession is one. You may have seen there's a company in California that just got funded by Sequoia. These guys, there's so much inefficiencies in lawyers' offices and practices and things. So I think you're going to see a lot of action happening in that, AI vertical, just like you see it happening in the healthcare vertical. And in the healthcare vertical, not everything is about, medical stuff. A lot of it is about workflow and things like that, because doctors complain about spending a lot of time, wastage on things like that. But so those are the two I think that you're really going to see explode in the next 5 years. Those two type of things. Last but not least, of course, is everything related to the back office functions of companies, particularly related to regulatory obligations. So in the financial services sector, you think of AML and KYC requirements that you have. More and more regulators are putting pressure on all these financial institutions to be able to do that. In Europe, on average now, it takes almost 3 months to open up a bank account because of these things. Almost 3 months to open up a bank account, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. Largely due to the documentation needs and the procedural needs and everything. I think if somebody really built a product that could help, financial institutions cut that down from months to days, it would obviously be significantly more beneficial. So back office functions in financial services is a huge opportunity also.
And one last question before we move into the final section of the interview. When you explore these companies that you're investing in, and you have to advise also on their growth path, well, you always have the question: do we go organic growth? Do we do M&A? Between both, what do you think a company should focus on?
My rule is until you're about 10 years old as a company, you should only be doing organic stuff, right? M&A is dangerous. It's not always very accretive. The data is not super clear that it works. There are some really great companies who know how to do M&A. Salesforce is one of them that are very, very strong at doing that. But many M&A transactions never yield the benefits that people thought they would, right? So, if you're using it as another way to grow, that's okay. You just need to make sure you know what you're buying and figure out a way to implement it and things like that. But in general, I think young companies, the ones I'm interested in, I expect them to be completely organic for the first 10 years of their lives.
That's a great way to end this second part of the interview. And we're going now to the most fun and the most important questions of all, which are the personal questions for you.
Okay.
So as you know, a lot of our audience are young professionals and lots of entrepreneurs or people thinking about this path in entrepreneurship. So if you had one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'd say, find a big idea and jump into it, but do it out of passion, and just go for it and go all in. I think that's sometimes the issue with entrepreneurs is they're trying to, do I start my company? Do I raise capital? What do my parents think? What's it? I'm like, at the end, either you're willing to put 1,000% of you into it for 6 months to see, or don't bother doing it, right? So just go all in is kind of my thing. My son has a company. I told him exactly the same thing. You know, he's like, yeah, okay. You know, and so he drops out of university. He goes and does this, and very proud of him. You know, I think it's all about just being all in on something. Startups are an all-consuming activity, right? There's no life-work balance in startups. This is, you know, 100-hour work. And so you have to be passionate about the idea. You have to like the people you do it with, right? So these things that matter, because it's an all-consuming thing. The first 5 years of your journey, you have no life. It's just how it is.
Is what it is, right? But it does seem that during your path, also in your career, you've come across people that might have impacted you, maybe as a mentor. Have you had anyone that you would single out as a mentor, or a good lesson that you got from them?
No, I'd say, you know, having a mentor is so important in your life. And I have one who was my first boss when I was in the consulting business. Over time, I worked for him for 10 years. He became a bit like a bigger brother to me. And, you know, whenever I have, whether we're closer or apart from each other, there's always a very easy phone call about, hey, I'm thinking about this and I need to pick your brain or whatever. And so I do hope everybody can figure out a way to have one mentor that you can call about stuff, because sometimes, you know, it gets lonely out there, and sometimes you can't turn to your wife, you can't turn to your friend, you can't turn to this. You want, you know, the person that's not going to judge you, and since he knows you for all these years, he can give you advice, or she can give you advice, however you want to do it. But, you know, find a mentor, invest in the mentor yourself, because at the end, it's you have to make the commitment, right? The mentor is already successful. You need to invest in that person and say, I want that person to be my reference person. I'm a big believer that it's important. So I encourage my partners to have one. I encourage all my founders, you know, to say, okay, who is the person you can call if you're tired of hearing from me, and you can call that person for different type of advice.
Great advice. Okay, moving on to another question. So you chose the name of your Mangrove Capital. Is there a story behind it?
Well, yeah, the story is, you know, when we started back in, you know, in 2000, there were many great venture firms called Sequoia or Oak and things like that. And so trees made sense. And my parents were live on an island in Florida. They have these mangrove plants in front of them. And we said, oh, wow, trees, plants, mangrove. That's kind of how we came about it. Nothing more scientific than that.
Very natural, everything. Okay, aside from work, you do have a life, right? So what are your hobbies?
I love to go to football matches. I'm a big fan. I'm a massive fan of FC Barcelona, of course.
Visca Barça.
You know, I like cycling a lot, mostly road biking. I'm a big fan of wine. And really, those are the three things that keep me busy outside of work, right? And family, of course. But those are the things, yeah.
They look pretty good to me. I must say, I like how you think. Any favorite movie or book?
Oh man, I'm a massive sci-fi geek, you know. I'll watch anything that's science fiction. So, and I started with Star Trek, the original version, you know, and I've watched every single one after that. And so if I could spend a couple hours watching TV every day, it would every day be a sci-fi thing, right? That's kind of my thing. And I find those things just so fascinating. You know, it's interestingly enough that as dumb as some of those shows appear to be, a lot of the research behind them is actually quite serious, right? When they make those shows, they actually talk to scientists and they talk to people and futurists and things like that. So, you know, you look at that, and today, sometimes I go back and watch the original Star Trek, which was in the 60s, and yeah, a lot of that stuff has happened already. So it's kind of cool.
It's funny that you say it. We actually that call that we had with Oded Gal, he talked about the holograms and how that technology some of it actually exists. It's just that the cost right now is prohibitive, but it's wild to me that we're already in science fiction life era, right?
Yeah. I mean, look at the voice. So, you know, we've all grown up with the keyboard being mostly the tool of interface between us and the machine, right? All those movie series all talk about voice being it. You know, we've been hoping for it so long. But nowadays, any one of these LLMs, even your Apple phone, it's really, really good. You hardly need a keyboard anymore. So, you know, fast forward 5 years from now, I think the keyboard is dead, right? Ultimately, we're not going to use it anymore. And really, they talked to us about that in the 60s. So it's taken a long time, right, to really get general and be accepted by everybody, which I think is the particularity generally of tech. Tech takes a long time to get disseminated to everybody beyond, you know, the people that are directly involved in it. So yeah, Star Trek, #1.
And one final question, which is, what keeps you motivated? You've had a relatively long career. You've done several things. What keeps you going?
Well, it's the search for that next great thing, and hanging out with a lot of cooler, younger people, right? As you age and as your career progresses, you're always trying to do the next great thing. You know, man, okay, I did this and I did that, and boy, what's that next thing that I can do? And intellectually, that keeps you very fresh and alert, and that's really what keeps me going. Is I want to make a difference for myself. I want to make a difference for my family. Ultimately, I want to build things like K that are going to make a difference for many, many people. Now, arguably, Skype and Wix made a difference, but I think K really is going to make a worldwide difference as we build, you know, the world's first machine doctor, right? And that's a big accomplishment because of everything else we've talked about. And so that's what keeps me awake. You know, how can I get there faster, better, stronger type thing?
That's a great way to end this interview. Thank you so much, Mark. We learned a lot, and we really thank you for being here. Yossi, back to you.
Thank you very much, and best of luck at Cornell. And also best of luck in how you think about moving from Cornell into whatever professional world you're talking about. In any event, I'm always around if you want to have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Mark, thank you very much again for joining us and for answering all of our questions. I must admit, though, I'm a Star Wars fan, so sorry. But yeah, for everybody else in the audience, stay tuned for our next few episodes, or maybe even previous episodes, NVIDIA, Zoom, Ready, Sierra. Mark, thank you very much for joining us again, and I appreciate you.
All right, guys. Thanks again. Bye-bye.